Professor Brown stated in an NBC interview. The massive earthquake in southern Mexico is certainly not a precursor to the big one. Rather, this earthquake has confirmed that the energy from the Ring of Fire is being released, and the movements along the San Andreas Fault have eased. Other experts echoed similar sentiments. Until now, there had been some skepticism regarding Professor Mohan's claims. However, the situation completely changed after the southern Mexico earthquake. Mainstream media unleashed criticism. They attacked us by dragging in aspects of our personal lives that had nothing to do with the incident. Conservative media focused on the fact that Professor Mohan's grandmother was Indian and that I am Korean, implying that people like us, not purely Caucasian, had no right to make such statements. Some even claimed that I was connected to ISIS or that I had met porn stars in a secret room to engage in sexual activities. This makes one realize that no matter the country, sensationalist journalists exist. The internet was buzzing just as much. Was the prediction of a major earthquake wrong? They said a major quake would hit the central region, but it hit the south instead. Serves them right. But even if it was a major earthquake, it doesn't seem like there was much damage. The claim that 1 million people would die from the big one is nonsense. That's rural Mexico. If it happened in San Francisco, the story would be different. In return, San Francisco is much better designed for earthquakes. Even with similar quakes, casualties would likely be much lower. I was worried for days and couldn't sleep well, but I think I can finally sleep peacefully today. The big one will absolutely not happen. Online gambling sites were also heated. Each site started betting on the likelihood of an M9.0 or higher earthquake occurring in San Francisco in September. People do not lie when money is on the line. Therefore, various predictions have shown that the accuracy of betting sites is quite high. Until then, no was dominant at 81-19. However, after the major earthquake in southern Mexico, that ratio changed to 92-8. Take you muttered while observing this. Still, 8% believes in our words. It's hard to tell if they really believe it or are just aiming for a quick fortune. The payouts should be considerable. Should I place a bet too? Gambling is illegal. In South Korea, due to the principle of nationality, betting on legally operated gambling sites abroad can still lead to punishment. Take you nodded and replied. Then I need to do it without getting caught. Well, if you don't get caught, it isn't a crime. I received a call from Professor Mohan. Perhaps due to the media criticism, he sounded disheartened. That's strange. According to the data analysis, an earthquake should occur in Mexico City. What I saw was indeed the Mexico City major earthquake. It just happened in the south first. The Mexico City earthquake you mentioned hasn't occurred yet. It will likely happen soon. According to Professor Mohan's analysis, it is before the big one. The question is when exactly that will be. Right now, both the media and political circles are excitedly claiming that our assertion is wrong. In this situation, there's no way to execute an evacuation plan. To reverse the tide, the Mexico City earthquake needs to be proven. It would be nice if we could glean other information like with the San Francisco earthquake. The earthquake in Mexico is merely a precursor to the big one. Having already experienced one earthquake, the next one will be smaller. That's somewhat reassuring. Still, since Mexico City is the capital of Mexico, the damage is likely to be much greater than that of the Pijijayapan earthquake. Don't worry about anything else, just focus on the research. Got it. After the call ended, I put my phone down. Now only 20 days remain. Upon seeing the article, Park Si-hyung burst into laughter. Ha ha ha. He always wore a pretentious smile in front of the media and the public. It had been a while since he could laugh freely like this. So even the great Kong Jin, who can be wrong sometimes. Professor Mohan had claimed the potential for a big one in academia for a long time. Until then, no one had paid attention to his assertion, but after Kong Jin who stepped in, it gained significant traction. However, this incident proved that claim to be incorrect. It had only caused unnecessary chaos in California. If nothing significant happens within the next 3 weeks, Kong Jin-hoo will lose all shares and management rights of OTK Company. Although it was a voluntary deposit, the California state government would certainly exercise its rights. During the financial meeting, he listened to domestic earthquake experts. They all said the same thing. Predicting the location and magnitude of an earthquake is difficult, and accurately timing it is virtually impossible. Why on earth did he do something so foolish? Successful people sometimes make ridiculous mistakes. They become intoxicated by ongoing success, convinced that they can never fail. Did he, after a few big successes in investments, actually think he could predict disasters too? Perhaps he became mentally unstable after suffering a collapse from an earthquake. Or he may have been deceived by Professor Mohan's words. Regardless, it's too late to come to his senses now. Park Si-hyung recalled his tumultuous history with Kang Jin-hoo, the raids, the National Intelligence Service's investigations, the situation with Hosung Savings Bank and more. As a result, he suffered serious setbacks to his morality and image, had to issue a public apology, cut ties with associates, and even had his father-in-law arrested. Being meticulous, Park Si-hyung never forgot his grudges. So, after becoming president, he indiscriminately retaliated, mobilizing the media, conservative organizations and investigative agencies. The only reason he hadn't gone after Kang Jin-hoo until now was because Ronald was behind him. But now Ronald had no choice but to abandon Kang Jin-hoo. The Korean presidential election was also just around the corner. He still holds power, and now when Kang Jin-hoo is on the verge of collapse, this is truly the last opportunity to take action. American media outlets were pouring criticism on Kang Jin-hoo and Professor Mohan. Among them were many articles that had no basis and were nonsensical. Daily World News. It's known for publishing outrageous stories like a famous Hollywood actress being pregnant with the son of a Libyan dictator, or that the US government captures aliens for experimentation. Essentially, it's a tabloid that wouldn't even rank in the media, akin to a sports newspaper in Korea. There was an article claiming that Kang Jin-hoo had sexual relations with porn stars in a private room at Face It. Even Americans dismissed it as a joke. What the truth is doesn't matter. If the media reported the truth, he wouldn't even have made it to the presidency. What the public believes is the truth. Park Si-hyung muttered as he read the article. I guess I need to pay them back for what they've done. After the massive earthquake in southern Mexico, the employees of OTK Company were severely shaken. Fortunately, Henry, who was in charge of operations, performed his duties flawlessly. The container ships entered the harbor one after another. I was holed up in a hotel with Taekyu, reviewing the situation and giving instructions while trying to persuade others. No matter how much I prepared, these were merely measures taken after the disaster occurred. To minimize damage, the government needed to take preemptive action. But the political sphere seemed not even to have a plan, let alone evacuate people immediately. The Democratic Party criticized Ronald for the evacuation drills conducted earlier. They argued that unnecessary drills heightened confusion, deceived by misplaced words. The media joined in the attack on Ronald. With each passing day, I felt increasingly anxious. Time was truly running out, yet very few believed what I said. What is this, the curse of Cassandra? A woman from Greek and Roman mythology? Yep. Cassandra had the gift of foresight but was never believed by anyone, due to a curse from Apollo. During the Trojan War, when the Greek army withdrew and left behind the wooden horse, Cassandra prophesied that bringing the horse into the city would lead to Troy's downfall. But once again, people disbelieved her prophecy and brought the horse into the city, resulting in Troy's destruction. Taekyu said, "For now, wait for the earthquake in Mexico City to happen. Then maybe they'll believe you." This is insane. Now, I had to pray for an earthquake in Mexico City to prevent the earthquake in San Francisco. What did Mexico ever do to deserve this? September 19, 1:15 p.m. A magnitude 7.1 earthquake struck central Mexico, including Mexico City and its surrounding areas. Coincidentally, this day marked the anniversary of the 1985 Mexico City earthquake, which resulted in 40,000 casualties. Just after a memorial event that morning, another earthquake hit Mexico City. There were widespread power outages and water supply issues across the city, and a rise in robberies took advantage of the lack of security. Fortunately, Mexico City had maintained its earthquake preparedness and had recently conducted a large-scale evacuation drill following the warnings of the aftershock. Residents calmly evacuated amidst the chaos. While there could have been significant casualties, the death toll remained under 300. U.S. media broadcasted the earthquake situation live. The ground cracked, buildings crumbled like sandcastles. Dozens of high-rise buildings appeared to lean like the Leaning Tower of Pisa, captured on camera. Major earthquake of M7.0 or higher strikes central Mexico. Buildings collapsed in the Mexico City earthquake. Aftershock predictions proven correct. Professor Mohan accurately predicted the mid-September Mexico City earthquake. Is this a precursor to the big one? Professor Brown, the likelihood of the big one remains extremely low. Viewers were astonished at the news. Just before, everyone had felt reassured, believing Professor Mohan's claims were wrong. But then the situation flipped again. What is going on? Aftershock predictions were right. Is this a precursor to the big one? Does that mean the big one is coming or not? A line of people formed to leave San Francisco and Silicon Valley. Those who couldn't leave due to work sent their families to relatives in other states for safety. Due to the influx of people leaving the city, accommodations near the California state border were completely booked. Tourist spots, always crowded with Chinese visitors, saw a sudden drop in foot traffic. Some companies canceled scheduled business trips and events, postponing everything until after October. The three major U.S. indices plummeted, while safe assets like gold and the yen hit new all-time highs. The odds on gambling sites, which had dropped to 95-5, shifted to 74-26. While I was watching the news with Taikyu, a call came in. He bluntly said, "Get over here now." Got it. As soon as the call ended, I told Taikyu, "Pack your bags." We immediately left the hotel and boarded a plane. We arrived at Washington National Airport around sunset. Stepping outside, we saw security personnel waiting from the White House. We got into the car. Despite the late hour, President Ronald and Vice President Bauer were present in the Oval Office. Both looked utterly exhausted. After the reports of the Mexico City earthquake, I could imagine chaos had erupted in the White House. That's probably why they summoned me immediately. I spoke with them earlier at the airport, and Professor Mohan also received contact from the White House. However, he decided to remain in his lab, believing that would be more helpful. Ronald looked at me and said, "So, the earthquake really struck Mexico City?" I nodded. Professor Mohan was spot on. I believe big one will be the same. Ronald sighed as he spoke. What do you think we should do? As I mentioned earlier, we need to evacuate the residents of San Francisco and Silicon Valley immediately and establish rescue plans. Vice President Bauer shot back at me, "If we just evacuate without a plan, our approval ratings will plummet." Not long ago, Ronald's approval rating barely held at 25%. But due to the chaos from Big One, it had dropped below 20%. Taikyu, with an innocent expression, bluntly stated, "Aren't we out of options for dropping support?" Vice President Bauer glared with narrowed eyes, prompting Taikyu to feign interest in the office's surroundings. The office is quite cozy and nice. No one else in the world would act this way in front of the U.S. President and Vice President. Vice President Bauer exclaimed, "Do you even know what Silicon Valley is?" I fired back. Silicon Valley has no silicon in it. This was a self-evident statement that many overlooked. Silicon Valley is a portmanteau of silicon, the element used in semiconductors, in Santa Clara Valley. However, there are no silicon mines in Silicon Valley. The name originated because since the 1970s, semiconductor industries and IT companies flocked there. The World Trade Center collapsed during the 9/11 terrorist attacks, and Morgan Stanley's headquarters was inside. In an instant, the headquarters vanished, along with all equipment and facilities. Morgan Stanley managed hundreds of billions of dollars in financial assets. A misstep could have turned into a catastrophic financial disaster. Yet Morgan Stanley resumed operations less than a day after the headquarters fell. This was possible because thousands of employees successfully evacuated just before the building collapsed. Even if data backups existed, experts had to manage them. If all the headquarters staff had perished, Morgan Stanley would have faced irreparable damage. Silicon Valley exists because it houses leading companies and the people who work in them. As long as they are alive, Silicon Valley can be rebuilt anywhere. But if they all die, rest assured the U.S. industry would regress for over a decade. Ronald was the only U.S. president in history without political or public office experience. Even as a Republican, he had no significant ties to the party. This meant he was free from the interests of existing political powers. As a result, he could draw conclusions based solely on what he deemed right, without worrying about how his decisions might alter the political landscape or how others viewed him. I thought foresight would lead the future in the right direction. However, there was one question lingering in my mind. I chose to support Ronald because I saw the signs. The result was a chaotic American politics marked by a narrow majority, trade disputes and various scandals. If Diane had become president, the Democratic majority in Congress would have helped her push her pledges. Trade disputes wouldn't have occurred, and there would have been no Russian scandal or sex scandals. Why was it Ronald and not Diane? What was the reason Ronald had to become president? I felt like I was finally beginning to understand. When approval ratings are high and the political atmosphere is stable, no one wants to take risks. Instead, it's in times of chaos that different choices become possible. I looked directly at Ronald and said, "You once asked me if you could be a great president, right?" At that time I answered yes, but I wasn't really sure. However, I can now confidently say that this is the only opportunity for that to happen. When Ronald entered the Republican primaries, no one was sure he would become president. That doubt remained even after he secured the Republican nomination. His campaign team and even his family didn't believe in his victory. The only person who was sure he would become president apart from him was me. I was the only one who confidently supported him. And I still held that same level of certainty. "What will you do?" Ronald stared at me for a long time. I did not avert my gaze. "Do you know what will happen if Big One doesn't come? We'd both be finished. But if Big One comes, you will be the greatest president in history. You might even win the Nobel Peace Prize." Ronald chuckled at my words. "Nobel Peace Prize, that sounds nice." He stood up and firmly grabbed my shoulders with both hands. "Let's take this opportunity to challenge it." Vice President Bauer was so surprised that he jumped up. "This is ridiculous." Ignoring that, Ronald called for his aide. "Prepare a press briefing." Vice President Bauer mumbled, looking incredulous, alternating his gaze between me and Ronald. "Everyone is crazy. Completely insane." 11:30 p.m. Eastern Time. In the White House press room, major U.S. media outlets had gathered. Usually the spokesperson gives the briefing, but this time Ronald took the stage himself. He spoke with exaggerated gestures as usual. "Effective immediately, we are declaring a national emergency and designating the San Francisco Bay Area as a disaster zone. We will evacuate residents in 3 zones and prepare for the earthquake. An integrated disaster response headquarters under the president will be established immediately, and we will devise all measures to reduce potential damage from the Big One." The unexpected announcement left the reporters in shock. Once the initial surprise faded, they all jumped up to bombard him with questions. "Have you received consent from the ruling party? Is there anything that requires congressional approval? Do you believe evacuations can be completed on time? What is the basis for the Big One? Please respond with specific measures." We had surpassed the most crucial hurdle of persuading the president. But the real problem was just beginning. Both the Democratic and Republican parties would strongly oppose, and public opinion would likely worsen significantly. We booked a hotel near the White House. Takeu looked at me and asked, "What if the Big One doesn't come? Are we going to get executed?" "You won't be executed. But we could very well get shot on the street." Now less than 10 days remained. A Big One alert was issued for the San Francisco Bay Area. For the next 10 days, public offices and schools would close, and public enterprises would be forced to halt operations. Private companies were pressured to either deploy employees elsewhere or send them on leave, while simultaneously offering tax relief incentives. Personnel were mobilized from fire stations and hospitals across the United States. Only essential staff remained while others headed toward California. Military transport planes were deployed to transport supplies. Field rations, tents, clothing, blankets, and medicines were stacked neatly in California. The National Guard and federal troops began mobilizing for rescue, filling highways with military trucks. All available resources in the U.S. were converging toward San Francisco. As concerns over the Big One increased, some measures were expected, but this went beyond anyone's imagination. When various measures were announced, not only the U.S. but the entire world was shaken. Silicon Valley paralyzed. What will happen to America's high-tech industry? This economy comes to a halt. Stock prices of IT companies in Silicon Valley such as Apple, Google, AMZ plummet. Real estate in San Francisco crash. Properties reduced to half price. Gold and oil prices surge. Inflationary pressure increases. Panic buying of essentials in various places. Still, the likelihood of the big one remains below 5%. The Washington Post featured the headline, "Ronald Stamper's gone completely crazy." Public opinion was also heated. Evacuating residents is ridiculous. I oppose corporate relocation. It's like relocating all citizens of Seoul to escape the nuclear threat. Supermarkets are running out of supplies and I can't even buy drinking water. Walmart is out of dog food. My puppy is going to starve. If it's going to be like this, wouldn't it be better to just take a hit from the big one? Democratic Representative Louis Kincaid harshly criticized Ronald in a media interview. The president is insane. Isn't that an extreme expression? No. He's completely crazy. He's destroying America by believing the words of a nutty professor and a speculator. Even Fox News, which is pro-Ronald and pro-Republican, expressed concern about this action. Time magazine featured a photo of Kong Jin-Hu on its cover. The headline was "Rasputin Kong. Shelters must not be too close to danger zones or too far away." Additionally, transportation needs to be convenient for moving supplies and personnel. Ronald designated a temporary shelter, and we moved various items stored in the warehouse there. Warren Buffett, who appeared in the media, stated, "I will not comment on the possibility of Big One or Representative Kong Jin-Hu. However, I cannot say that disaster preparedness is completely off track. Berkshire Hathaway will ensure that our subsidiaries produce and supply related items in accordance with government measures. The Coca-Cola plant will also increase the production of bottled water, so please understand that there may be a shortage of cola stock at stores for a while. I spoke with Chairman Im Jin-young. We will provide as much support as possible without putting a strain on Samsung Group. Thank you. In the current situation, that alone is a significant help." The White House Situation Room displayed real-time evacuation updates. "We needed to complete as many evacuations as possible before the big one arrived. But isn't it said that bad things come in pairs?" Amidst the busy disaster preparedness, another disaster struck within the United States. September 22, 2 a.m. A fire broke out in Houston, the largest city in Texas. The 25-story Blue Bell Tower, owned by the city, primarily housed low-income white residents. The flames began on the 5th floor and quickly spread up the facade. Nearby firefighters responded to the call, but delays occurred as access for fire trucks was not properly secured. In just 20 minutes, the fire engulfed the entire building. Most residents were asleep at that late hour and could not escape in time. Cameras captured people jumping from the building, unable to withstand the flames. Firefighters battled the blaze for 15 hours before finally bringing it under control, but by then the building was completely destroyed. Only a few dozen people were evacuated and the fate of approximately 400 others remains unclear, with most presumed dead. In the face of such a major disaster, the governor should have shown up to direct rescue efforts and formulate a response. However, Governor Martin Albright only appeared at the emergency meeting room 10 hours after the fire broke out. The fire alarm system did not function and there were no sprinklers. The most significant issue was the use of flammable sandwich panels on the exterior during renovations. The renovation, which would not have passed a safety inspection, was made possible because Governor Albright relaxed building regulations after cutting the budget for rental apartments. As criticism mounted, he deflected responsibility towards the president, despite being a Republican. The federal government has moved all available firefighting and medical personnel to California under the pretense of preparing for an improbable earthquake. This led to confusion and increased casualties. Otherwise, we could have saved precious lives. While it's true that his actions had some impact, this statement felt like an excuse after failing in the initial response. Most importantly, he could not adequately explain what he had been doing for 10 hours. However, discontent over emergency measures and dissatisfaction with Ronald were rampant across the United States, and this tragedy was enough to ignite that frustration. The media focused more on blaming Ronald than holding Governor Albright accountable. At 2 a.m. today, fire broke out at Houston's Blue Bell Tower. Confirmed dead, 60 missing, over 350. Most missing presumed dead. The worst fire disaster in American history. More fatalities than the Mexico City earthquake. In preparing for the big one, the fire disaster was not prevented. President Ronald must take responsibility. The belief that there was no further drop in approval ratings was a great misconception. After the Bluefell Tower fire, even his core supporters turned away, causing Ronald's approval rating to plummet below 10%. As the evacuation plan was implemented, some chaos was expected. However, the current situation has far exceeded those expectations. With the outbreak of the Bluebell Tower fire disaster, public opinion has worsened drastically. Protests that began in memory of the victims spread across the United States. Demonstrators demanded the immediate end of the evacuation plan in San Francisco and called for Ronald's resignation, gathering even in front of the White House. In Korean towns across various cities, hate protests erupted. Koreans are ruining America. Get out of our land. Yellow monkeys, go away. The most intense protests happened in LA's Koreatown, the largest Korean community in the U.S., not far from San Francisco. The sight of the gathered protesters was reminiscent of the 1992 LA riots. The difference was that instead of African Americans, it was entirely made up of white people. They shouted racist slurs, throwing rotten eggs and food waste towards stores and laundries, leaving Korean residents in fear. As the chaos from the evacuation measures escalated, the protests grew more intense. Foot traffic in shopping areas came to a halt, and slingshots and Molotov cocktails began to be thrown. Frustrated, Koreans organized a self-defense group. Though America has relatively free gun ownership, not many could handle firearms well. In contrast, while gun ownership is illegal in Korea, nearly all adult men knew how to use guns. Led by first-generation immigrant men with military experience, they began to patrol and provide security. Concerned about the seriousness of the situation, state authorities sent police to disperse the protesters. However, hate protests against Koreans showed no signs of stopping. Midtown Manhattan, New York City. Amid buildings under 40 stories, one 72-story tower loomed high above. This building, called Stamper Tower, was erected by Ronald after he acquired the air rights of surrounding buildings early in his real estate ventures. Stamper Tower was nothing short of a symbol of Manhattan. However, since the emergency measures were announced, fierce protests had been ongoing in front of it. There was no particular reason, other than the name Stamper being utterly distasteful to them. As the protests continued, there was a discussion at the residents' meeting about removing the name Stamper. When the 7 letters affixed at the entrance were taken down, Stamper Tower simply became Tower. The protesters who witnessed this erupted in cheers. Wow! We won. Get lost, Ronald. Daikong Jinhu. The entire U.S. was engulfed in chaos, with protests erupting everywhere, but Ronald remained unmoved. He continued to issue evacuation plans without faltering. Once he made a decision, he pushed forward without looking back. That was his style, whether in real estate or politics. In the end, he achieved victory. Amidst the dizzying situation in the U.S., I spoke with my senior, Sang Yeep. Are you managing the tasks I assigned you? Yeah. But public opinion here isn't good. Protesters are constantly gathering in front of the company, and even the police seem to be in on it, not caring at all. It's not something to brag about, but public opinion about me was also at its worst. If you asked Americans to name 2 people they'd want to kill right now, they would likely point to me and Ronald. Add one more and it would be Professor Mohan. I think the prosecution is going to launch a search soon. I was taken aback. A search? For what? Then Sang Yeep replied. Don't you know? Right now, Korea is in an uproar because of your sex scandal. What? A sex scandal? Kang Jin-hoo, sex with a porn star from Facete. The first article appeared in a tabloid called Daily World News. Korean media picked up that article and presented it as if reported by prominent U.S. outlets. They continued to exchange articles without any fact-checking, inflating suspicions further. If the other party was a porn star or anyone else, having sex alone may invite moral criticism, but it wouldn't necessarily lead to legal consequences. At some point, sex transformed into sexual services, and the narrative that a payment was made evolved into prostitution. The Jungilbo published an article on the front page and criticized it vehemently. OTK company CEO Kang Jin, who received sexual services from subsidiaries, face it. Excerpt. Everyone is equal before the law. This applies to the rich and the poor, citizens and those in power alike. If the allegations of sexual services and prostitution are proven true, appropriate punishment should be administered. Minister of Gender Equality and Family Cho Yu-sun mentioned this article during a meeting, strongly condemning it. Recently, a CEO of a company has been known to receive sexual services from several porn actors and has engaged in prostitution, shocking many. This is essentially sexual violence by power and is an intolerable crime. Even now, countless women around the world suffer from sexual assault and exploitation. I urge a thorough investigation for the sake of women's rights, regardless of status. After the Hozong Savings Bank incident, conservative groups which had been quiet began large-scale protests. The Parents Association took the lead, joined by Doctors' Mothers, Mom Volunteer Corps and National Defense Veteran Association. This was a major gathering of conservative groups, with thousands in attendance. They gathered in front of the OTK company headquarters, demanding punishment for prostitution and holding a rally against Kang Jin-ho, blaming him for the turmoil in the U.S. Kang Jin-ho, who destroys the Korea-U.S. alliance, step down. Step down. Step down. Arrest Kang Jin-ho. Arrest. Arrest. Seize all his assets. Seize. Seize. The protesters shouted nonsensical slogans all day long through loudspeakers. Even though it was an illegal gathering that wasn't reported in advance, there was no police control. The protesters attempted to enter the building, while security guards desperately tried to hold them back. Calling the police only led to a police car coming to take a quick look before leaving. The protest began on the 15th. However, after a major earthquake struck Mexico City, the protests disappeared for a few days. Yet after the Bluebell Tower fire, public opinion against President Ronald and Kang Jin-ho in the U.S. severely worsened, prompting them to re-emerge. The conservative group reported Kang Jin-ho, and testimonies from voice-modulated whistleblowers followed. The prosecution stormed in with search warrants, claiming they were looking for evidence of sexual favors. "We've come from the prosecutor's office. Please cooperate with the search," they said. Park Sang-yeop raised both hands and replied, "Yes, yes. Do as you please." The prosecution swept through, taking the computer hard drives, documents, and even employees' smartphones. Unlike last time when they were caught off guard, this time they were prepared for the search. All important data had been backed up on the server, and most records were deleted in a way that made recovery impossible. The employees' phones had also been replaced just before the search. As public authority failed to take any action, the protests grew increasingly violent. Eventually an incident occurred. Jung Jae-hong was assaulted by protesters while returning from an external task. Park Sang-yeop rushed to rescue Jung Jae-hong and ended up getting beaten as well. Had it not been for the ex-cop security guards rushing in to save them, the situation could have become dangerously severe. Park Sang-yeop only suffered minor bruises, but Jung Jae-hong was in such bad shape that he needed to be hospitalized. The police arrived long after the report was made but, as expected, took no significant action. Furious, Park Sang-yeop stormed into the police station. "Why aren't you arresting the assailants? I got beaten up and one of my employees is hospitalized." The officer on duty replied nonchalantly, "How do we know who hit you? I'm submitting the surveillance video." The protest scenes were fully recorded by external CCTV and the action cameras of the ex-cop guards. They wore masks. How can you identify anyone from the footage? Then why are you allowing masked individuals to protest illegally in a rule-of-law country? The police nodded listlessly. "Fine, if you have evidence to submit, just leave it there." I spoke with team leader Lee Cheol-jin from ex-cop. The protesters have gathered not only in front of the CEO's house but also in front of the Dongtan house. So far there hasn't been a problem, but if things go wrong it might become dangerous. Those bastards. In that moment anger surged within me. Do they not understand that family should be off limits? Take my mother to the Salon Hotel and completely shut down the area around the house. Also, double the bodyguards and provide 24-hour close protection. Understood. I will take full responsibility for the security. The organized actions of the conservative group, coupled with the police standing idle, indicated that there was someone behind this. It goes without saying who that might be. As I hung up, letting out a sigh, Ronald lightly tapped my shoulder and said, We're both dealing with sex scandals, aren't we? How is that the same? You were involved in sex and I'm just facing rumors. Public officials went door to door distributing disaster preparedness supplies and life jackets, while TV broadcasts replaced dramas and variety shows with guidelines for action during disasters and information about shelters. Not only were available resources insufficient, but now there was a move to commandeer private rescue equipment. The most needed items were boats and helicopters. Anticipating backlash from forced requisition, they opted for a different approach, offering tax exemptions. Mario Gonzalez, who resided in a mansion in Beverly Hills, had a helipad and a personal helicopter on his property. An employee from Samsung Electronics came to install GPS equipment and a radio in his helicopter. "Just sign here, please." Mario scoffed and replied, "I agree to the exemption of 3 years' worth of property tax, but I still don't understand what this is all about." The young employee said, "If nothing happens, that's great. But if something does happen, your helicopter could be a great help to someone." It seemed he had heard similar remarks while going around for installations. After all, who would participate in such a crazy scheme if not for tax benefits? Mario took the pen and signed the document. This is why democratic citizens should vote wisely. I hope those who voted for Ronald or didn't show up at the polls reflect on their choices. The disaster response plan included the use of smartphones. The app's functionality was simple. When an earthquake occurred, the government would forcibly activate the GPS on smartphones in the affected area via the communication network, transmitting location information to rescue centers. Additionally, if necessary, it could activate calls, the microphone, and the camera to check on individuals' survival status. However, how many people would actually download and install the app provided by the government? Thus, the direction of forcibly updating through the communication network was discussed. Since the telecom companies operated under government control by leasing frequencies, they had no choice but to comply. The issue was with software and hardware manufacturers. Currently, the smartphone OS market is effectively split between Apple and Google. The two giant IT companies based in Silicon Valley strongly opposed this. Apple CEO Tom Black personally spoke out, stating, "Under no circumstances should the government invade personal privacy. This not only raises constitutional concerns but also undermines the foundation of America." However, he stated that they would approve users downloading and installing the app and consenting to provide personal information. Naturally, less than half would be willing to do so. Even Chinese companies expressed their reservations. However, Samsung Electronics complied with the U.S. government's measures. When Google, the OS company, opposed, Samsung announced it would conduct forced updates through its own store. Samsung Electronics held a 32% market share in the U.S. smartphone market. If a user entered a dangerous area with a Samsung smartphone, the app was forcibly installed through the communication network, regardless of the user's consent. U.S. consumer groups strongly protested, claiming it violated customers' decision-making rights, and some outraged consumers posted pictures of themselves breaking Samsung phones on social media, declaring they would never purchase them again. Vice President Mike Bauer met with his longtime friend, former Republican Senator Chester Boyle, who has now retired from politics. However, an unexpected guest had arrived first: Democratic leader Louis Kincaid and several Democratic senators. Yet one person stood out among them. With a smile, he addressed Vice President Bauer. "Good to see you, Mr. Vice President." It was Simon Underwood, the governor of New Jersey. After losing the presidential election, Diane Underwood's political career had ended. However, the Underwood family's influence remained strong in politics, especially within the Democratic Party. Diane's younger brother, Simon Underwood, was touted as a top contender for the next Democratic presidential nomination. If nothing unusual occurred, he would face Ronald, who would be seeking re-election in the upcoming election. Bauer was surprised that he had come to Washington, D.C. without prior notice. Looking around, he asked, "What's going on here?" Tester replied, "First take a seat. I'll explain." Reluctantly, Bauer sat down at the urging of his friend. "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Vice President. You're well aware of the current state in America. California is paralyzed due to absurd evacuation measures, and hundreds of citizens have perished in the fire." Vice President Bauer interrupted Simon. "Cut to the chase, get to the point." Simon complied and stated directly, Support the impeachment of the president. President Bauer asked in surprise. What did you just say? You must know the grounds for impeachment better than I do, so I won't bother stating them. Instead, I want to say this. If President Ronald is impeached, the vice president will become president. Mike Bauer is a distinguished Republican, a traditional conservative, and a devout evangelical. He is unassuming, sincere, and speaks only the truth, possessing a capacity for inclusivity that encompasses seasoned Republicans. Ronald, lacking any support base within the party, chose him as a partner, and that choice proved to be correct. He became the foremost reason for Ronald's election by rallying traditional Republican supporters. It was said that within the party Mike Bauer made Ronald president, while outside the party, it was Kang Jin-hu who did. Having served as the governor of Hawaii, this vice presidency marked the end of his political career. If Ronald fails to be re-elected, that will be the end of it. Even if Ronald succeeds, he will retire in 4 years. After that, he will likely lead a peaceful life. He has already prepared a home in Hawaii to live with his wife. However, the name of the President of the United States remains in history. If you asked someone to name past presidents, even a homeless person lying on the street could name 10 on the spot. But can you recall any names of vice presidents? The president is the protagonist of history all by himself. His name will be eternally recorded both during and after his term. However, the vice president disappears from everyone's memory as soon as their term ends. Governor Simon suddenly spoke as if struck by a thought. There's a name I remember. Harry Truman was also a vice president. Harry Truman. The only reason people remember him as a vice president is one. If he hadn't succeeded to the presidency upon Roosevelt's death, would anyone remember his name today? It was a dangerous and secretive temptation. Vice President Bauer felt a flame ignite in his chest. The position he thought he could never attain. The chance to become the protagonist of history had been given to him. Simon spoke with a subtle tone. Please persuade the Republican senators to join the impeachment. He didn't think they would act solely for the national interest, expecting no reward in return. Vice President Bauer asked Simon, "What do you want?" It's not just President Ronald who should be held accountable in this matter. If the president is impeached, all related parties must resign. The Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of Homeland Security, and many others as well. Vice President Bauer understood what he was implying. Are you asking for that position? Simon did not deny it. Given the current situation, it will be difficult to stabilize the chaos solely with Republican power. The Democratic Party will contribute for the new president. It wasn't a bad proposal. The reason Ronald had been unable to show strong leadership since taking office was that Congress was dominated by the Democrats. If the impeachment passed, the Democrats' influence would only grow stronger. Their support was crucial for stable governance moving forward. Vice President Bauer looked at Simon. He thought that perhaps he and Simon would face each other in the next presidential election. Winning would be great and losing wouldn't matter much. Regardless, he would go down in history as the President of the United States. I will first meet with the Republican leaders. At his words, those gathered in the room broke into satisfied smiles. New Jersey Governor Simon Underwood issued an ultimatum to Ronald alongside Democratic senators. I will give you 3 days. Within that time, cease this madness and resign from the presidency. If you refuse, I will summon the House and Senate for impeachment votes. It was anticipated that Congress would strongly oppose this. However, the actual move to introduce impeachment was unexpected. Unlike Korea, where a presidential impeachment leads to a re-election in the U.S., the vice president assumes the position. Therefore, even if impeachment is successful, a regime change doesn't occur. After watching the news, you asked, has there ever been an impeached president in U.S. history? No. There had been close calls though. Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton were acquitted by the Senate, and Richard Nixon resigned just before passing in the House. Instead of meeting with the Democrats to persuade them, Ronald posted on Twitter. The donkey brays, but the elephant marches on. The donkey symbolizes the Democratic Party while the elephant represents the Republican Party. In the House, if a majority votes for impeachment, it will pass. Therefore, if the majority Democratic Party decides to vote, there's no way to stop it. However, the Senate requires a 2/3 majority to pass. While it might be difficult in the House, calculations suggested that if the Republicans united, they could effectively block it in the Senate. But then, despite numerous counsel and objections, President Ronald Stamper is destroying America by believing in Professor Mohan's false claims and Kang Jin-hoo's words. I have concluded that he has lost the judgment necessary to continue in the presidency. I urge the public to support this. May God's blessing be upon America. The speaker was none other than Vice President Mike Bauer. He was, in effect, the leader of the Republican Party. His stance indicated that even veteran Republicans had turned their backs on Ronald. With the Republican Party joining the impeachment effort, they secured enough votes in both the House and Senate for passage. Will he be impeached or will he resign? 21st century Rasputin bringing down the supreme ruler. Kang Jin-hoo is the true big one. Poll results show 91% overwhelmingly support impeachment. The impeachment vote date is September 28. The future of the United States was heading in an unpredictable direction. I hadn't been able to sleep properly for several days. I had dozed off leaning against the sofa and again I found myself standing there. The same scene unfolded before my eyes. What on earth are you trying to show me? The man next to me kept checking his watch and talking on his Bluetooth earpiece. The signal changed and people crossed the street. Once more the ground split open and I grabbed the hand of the man who was about to fall. Even knowing I couldn't save him, I pulled him towards me. I could see the Rolex watch on his right wrist. In that moment the ground beneath me gave way and I fell into an endless darkness. When I opened my eyes the world was silent. You asked. What did you see this time? The time when the big one is coming. You was taken aback. Really? What time is it? 12:47. The big one will come then. Though the 28th had arrived, the anticipated launch of the iPhone Z did not happen. There was no launch nor even a new product announcement, just like other companies. Looked very different from what I had seen. Everything must have changed because of me. Everyone was eagerly wishing for this situation to end soon. I received a call from Professor Mohan. He spoke in a weary voice. The movements of the San Andreas and Hayward faults are concerning. It feels like it's truly right on our doorstep. But honestly, I'm not sure what to make of it. Professor Mohan was also suffering from criticism. Demands for his dismissal were flooding in at the California Institute of Technology. The highest-level earthquake warning was issued for the San Francisco Bay Area. Meanwhile, the Democratic Party proceeded with impeachment proceedings as promised. Ronald now had two choices left: be impeached or resign beforehand. Ronald looked exhausted. His once passionate demeanor had faded, making him appear like a man in his 70s. We should start preparing the resignation announcement soon. Let's wait a bit. Ronald gave a bitter smile at my words. What will change if we wait? The big one might come before that. If what I had seen was correct, it would certainly happen. Kept checking my watch. Time was passing anxiously. And finally it was 12:47, the scheduled time. The big one did not come. The world remained silent. As I felt a surge of confusion, Ronald looked at me with a puzzled expression. Why is that? Oh, it's nothing. Why is nothing happening? What I saw was the hand of a wristwatch. There could be a few minutes of discrepancy. However, even after 30 minutes and then an hour, still nothing happened. Something is wrong. Taekye's face turned pale. My mind was in chaos, unable to think clearly. What did I misunderstand? Could it be that my actions influenced the earthquake? What in the world did I do? Outside, the shouts and screams of protesters could be heard. The police were clashing with the protesters trying to enter the White House. After a moment, Ronald finished a brief call and hung up the receiver. The House of Representatives has passed the impeachment measure. The Senate vote will be held shortly. An interview with the Speaker of the House was on TV. He explained the result of the impeachment vote and said, "Impeachment of the President is a deeply sorrowful event. For the sake of not leaving a stain on American history, I urge President Ronald to make a decision swiftly." Ronald lightly clapped his hands and got to his feet. Well, that's it. It had already been over 2 hours since Big One was supposed to arrive. Yet nothing happened. The San Francisco Bay visible on TV remained tranquil. Now the Senate vote was set to begin. There was no more time left. This was Ronald's final opportunity. I could not dissuade Ronald from announcing his resignation. It was his last shred of dignity. Now wasting money is no longer an issue. Everything is truly over. What went wrong? If Ronald hadn't listened to me, neither of us would have ended up like this. How is he feeling? Are you blaming me? Ronald chuckled softly and gave my shoulder a light pat. It's my decision, my judgment. There's no need to blame anyone. He had often found himself in controversy due to his flippant behavior, not very presidential. But on the brink of resignation he looked more presidential than ever. Ronald headed to the press room for his resignation announcement, leaving just the two of us. We remained silent for a long time. Takyu asked, looking puzzled. What's going on? Why hasn't the earthquake happened? I don't know anymore. Was it a mistake with the date or was there another reason? Just a moment ago I had been so certain. Now I couldn't even comprehend the truth. What had I really seen? Was it truly the future or just an illusion of my own making? Perhaps Big One never existed at all? What do I truly want? Is it preferable to have an earthquake to gain something, or is it better to not have one at all even if it means losing everything? Do I wish for the earthquake to happen or do I wish it won't? Memories of the accusations against me resurfaced, along with all I had done to prevent the earthquake disaster. Was it truly meaningless? Ronald appeared on the TV screen with a caption reading, White House Emergency Statement. Although the reason for the press conference was not revealed, everyone knew it was about his resignation. Once Ronald resigns, all emergency measures will cease. After that, even if the big one comes, there will be nothing we can do. Truly feels like everything is over. In that moment my vision blurred and I heard a ringing in my ears. So, just arrived in San Fran. I could tell it was the voice of the man standing next to me, not the one speaking at the podium. What is he saying? This time. JP Morgan. Definitely. IPO. Could it be? Takyu asked me, what's wrong? I muttered, that man was a JP Morgan employee. Who is that guy? JP Morgan's headquarters is on Wall Street. He's here on a business trip to San Francisco. Takyu blinked, clearly confused. What does that matter now? The East and West have a 3-hour time difference. Smartphones automatically adjust time by checking GPS and cell towers. But an analog clock needs to be manually adjusted. But what if he hadn't adjusted the time separately? Then at the time of the earthquake the local time isn't 12:47 but 3:47. After hearing this, Takyu looked at his watch in shock. It just passed. I turned my head toward the TV. Ronald read his prepared statement in a calm voice. Dear citizens, I hereby resign from the presidency of the United States. I felt my legs weaken as if I might collapse at any moment. It felt as if the ground beneath me was shaking. No, it's not an illusion. The ground is actually shaking. Takyu fell to the floor and Ronald, visible on the screen, staggered while holding onto the podium. The startled voices of the reporters flowed through the broadcast. What was that? What's happening? Could it be? An aide dashed into the frame and whispered something into Ronald's ear. At that moment, Ronald crumpled the announcement he was holding. Then he stared directly at the camera and said, The big one has come. Bang. Ronald slammed his fist on the podium. The reporters, who were flustered and unsure what to do, all turned to look at him. Ronald spoke in a firm tone. We knew the big one was coming and the government has prepared all necessary measures. I will immediately go to California to coordinate the rescue. The White House announcement ended there and the screen changed. Takyu sat on the floor looking at me as he asked, Are we safe now? We're alive, I replied. I pointed to the TV screen. Those people are dead. The screen that had just shown Ronald was now displaying San Francisco. The beautiful, vibrant city had turned into ruins. The earthquake that struck the West Coast had shaken the entire East Coast. There was no need to explain the extent of its force. The Golden Gate Bridge and the Bay Bridge, symbols of San Francisco, couldn't withstand the impact and had broken apart. Skyscrapers that were barely standing on their sides fell like dominoes, with smoke and dust rising everywhere. Looked like a scene from a disaster movie, but no disaster film could be this horrifying. I finally understood. Now I knew why the people of California referred to this as the big one. For the past 2 months, chaos reigned in the United States. The turmoil, which began with the fear of the big one, escalated to the impeachment of the president. With anxiety over the disaster compounded by political instability, the situation spiraled out of control. Despite this, Professor Mohan and Kong Jin-Hu did not retract their claims, and Ronald steadfastly pushed for evacuation plans. The whole world mocked America. The reason why the world's greatest power had fallen to such a level of ridicule was singular. Time magazine sarcastically referred to Kong Jin-Hu as the Rasputin of the 21st century. Rasputin was a mystic and false prophet during the imperial era in Russia. The Russian Emperor Nicholas II, who believed in him, fell from power, and the Romanov dynasty disappeared from history. A political commentator evaluated, Kong Jin-Hu made Ronald president and then ousted him from that position. Ironically, Vice President Bauer, who led the impeachment efforts, was also a key figure in making Ronald president. Unable to tolerate it any longer, the people rose up. Protests spread like wildfire across the United States. They mourned the victims of the Bluebell fire disaster while condemning Kong Jin-Hu and Ronald. Denver Stevenson, a student at the State University of New York, he led Ronald's ousting movement in New York. It wasn't a particularly organized group. He simply posted the time and place on FaceNote and gathered like-minded individuals. Even that was enough to attract thousands each time. They marched through the streets, chanting slogans. Today happened to be the day of the impeachment vote. When news broke that the impeachment resolution had overwhelmingly passed the House, the protesters erupted in excitement. Denver, holding a megaphone, shouted, "This is a victory for American democracy and for us, the American people." Wow! Ronald, step down. Step down. Step down. Punish Kong Jin-Hu. Punish him. Punish him. On the large electronic billboard where corporate ads usually played, a subtitle reading "Presidential Emergency Announcement" appeared, followed by news coverage. In light of the unprecedented situation of the president's resignation, not only the protesters but also passers-by all stopped in their tracks to look at the billboard or their smartphones. At this critical moment ahead of the Senate vote, the president's announcement signified only one thing. The protesters erupted into a frenzied cheer. Woo-wah! Ronald's resignation had now become a certainty. The roar filling the streets was so loud that the TV was inaudible. And then, at that moment, the ground suddenly shook violently and people fell over. What is happening? What's going on? What was that just now? The protesters looked at each other's faces. The street fell eerily silent as if it were a lie. Just then Ronald's voice was heard. "The big one has arrived." Everyone had expressions of disbelief. The big one has arrived? It was just a brief tremor. Could this be a fabricated excuse to evade impeachment? However, the electronic billboard suddenly displayed scenes from San Francisco. The city, once known as the most expensive and livable place in the U.S., had completely collapsed. The high-rise buildings that had beautifully adorned the city skyline came crashing down. A reporter shouted something, but their voice was drowned out by the sound of helicopters and deafening noise. It was a scene that felt utterly unreal. A few people quickly took out their smartphones to check the news. The entire newsfeed was filled with reports about the big one. The big one has arrived. San Francisco M9.8 earthquake occurs. Largest magnitude since earthquake monitoring. The worst catastrophe in American history. California state government assessing the situation. Screams and cries erupted from the crowd. "This is ridiculous. This can't be real. How could this happen? Oh God." Denver, who was leading the protest, recalled one person. Despite everyone's blame and ridicule, only one person had warned about the big one, putting everything on the line. And now that warning had become a reality. He dropped the megaphone and muttered blankly, "What have I done?" Just moments before, people holding signs and chanting were now screaming in panic. Damn it! The aftershock was right. That guy was completely right. The House, which passed the impeachment bill with an overwhelming vote difference, was filled with a celebratory atmosphere. The impeachment bill that passed the House was now headed to the Senate. If the president didn't resign, a vote would be held immediately to impeach him. But then, the big one arrived. The House, which had just been cheering, was plunged into silence. The grounds for impeachment were that the president had destroyed America by believing the words of an insane professor and a speculator from Korea. However, with the arrival of the big one, everything changed. Professor Mohan had accurately predicted the disaster, and Kong Jin-Hu had risked his entire fortune to reveal the truth. Ronald, the president, wasn't destroying America. He was taking the best measures to protect it. They had voted to impeach such a great president. The Senate, which had raised its voice for impeachment, immediately shifted its stance and rejected the impeachment bill as soon as the incident occurred. Ultimately, it was just the House that did something foolish. A Republican congressman asked the Speaker of the House, "What happens to us now?" The Speaker, forgetting there was a camera, muttered, "Motherfuck." I knew the big one was coming. But the moment it became a reality, I couldn't regain my senses. Reality revealed itself beyond all my imaginations. Thinking about how many people might have died filled me with such fear that my limbs trembled. Compared to the big one, the two recent earthquakes in Mexico seemed like child's play. My mind was in chaos. Did I really do my best? Could I have done better? Time was too short. If only there had been an extra month, no, even just a fortnight. "What are you doing?" "Excuse me." When I turned my head, Ronald, who had just been on TV, was standing next to me. He patted my back firmly with his palm and said, "We're going to California right now. Follow me." Instead of asking why, I nodded blankly. "Okay, I understand." I told Taekyu, "You should go back to Korea from here. I'll finish up here and join you. Please convey my message to Ali and Hyunju. And to Sanjiop and Henry too. All right, be careful." There was no need to pack anything separately. As I followed Ronald, his aide tried to stop us. "California is dangerous, Mr. President. It would be better for you to stay here." Ronald snapped at him, "There are people waiting for rescue in that dangerous place. Can you hide in safety and push someone else to go rescue them?" Once we exited the building, Vice President Bauer was standing there. He looked out of his mind as if he didn't even know what he had done. He probably didn't expect things would come to this. "I'm sorry. Ronald lightly patted his shoulder and said, "Right now, restoring the situation is our priority. I'll go to the scene immediately and you stay at the White House to manage the situation." As he said, we need to focus all our efforts on the rescue. We can sort out the details later after it's over. The light in Vice President Bauer's eyes returned to normal. "Ah, I understand." About a dozen vehicles headed straight for the nearby airport. At the airport, Air Force One, the official plane of the President of the United States, was ready for takeoff. Ronald boarded the plane first with a stern expression and everyone followed behind him. The reporters kept pressing their shutters to capture the scene on camera. How on earth does one live a life that leads to boarding Air Force One? I'm not even an American. I'm Korean. Air Force One, aptly nicknamed the White House in the Sky, is equipped with the presidential office, conference rooms, medical facilities, and has global communication capabilities. In the conference room, key figures including Ronald gathered. I was also present at the meeting. The entire scene was recorded. Ronald asked me, "How much relief supplies has OTK Company stockpiled in the U.S.?" I submitted the list and quantities to the disaster response headquarters. We are still producing and transporting supplies from countries like China and Vietnam. The initial production was shipped by sea, but after mid-September we opted for air transport due to urgency. The transportation costs skyrocketed to over 10 times, but there was no other choice. We will requisition everything in the U.S. and any additional supplies that arrive. We'll settle the costs after the operation is complete. I nodded in agreement. It's been prepared for America. Feel free to use it as you wish. Then I connected a video call with Caltech. The screen showed Professor Mohan. It seemed the stress had taken a toll on him. The once plump professor appeared to have lost significant weight. Caltech is over 500 kilometers away from San Francisco. However, perhaps unable to escape the impact, the research lab visible behind him was a mess. Books were scattered on the floor and equipment lay broken and strewn about. Professor Mohan looked distressed. It was likely guilt for not being able to prevent the disaster despite knowing it was coming. I could understand his feelings. There will be aftershocks for a while. While they won't be as large, each one will be of earthquake scale. Everyone's expression hardened at those words. But that wasn't the end. A tsunami measuring dozens of meters in height will soon arrive. If we are not prepared, the loss of life will increase uncontrollably. The tsunami in many ways was a greater disaster than the earthquake. During the South Asian earthquake and the Tohoku earthquake, most fatalities were due to drowning from the tsunami. Is the seismic center safe? Most are operating normally. Keep monitoring the situation and send updates to the disaster response headquarters. Understood. All radio and broadcast channels across the U.S. temporarily ceased operations, and a presidential statement was issued. Ronald, appearing calm yet resolute, spoke on screen. The earthquake is not over yet. There will be several aftershocks and a tsunami is coming. Residents in danger zones are advised to evacuate as quickly as possible. If evacuation is difficult, wear life jackets and take cover under desks to protect your heads. I reiterate, the government has completed disaster response preparations perfectly. The military, firefighters, and civilian volunteers are already engaged in rescue efforts and will save survivors. We will not stop until the last person is rescued. No matter what happens, the nation stands with you. Please pray for America. The next day, Time magazine published a special issue. The cover, adorned with a black border instead of the usual red, featured a profile of Kong Jin-Hu boarding Air Force One with a stern expression. The headline read, "Prophet Kong."